isn't in my vocabulary. Like we all have a job to do, and everyone's got to play to the end. You got to give your soul, and things aren't going our way right now. But the only way to get out the storm is to run through the storm, and we're going to run through the storm until we get out the storm, and we'll come out and the sun will shine on us, and we'll all be better.
Welcome into the Blue-White Tailgate Podcast. A little bit of a motivational quote from new head coach Terry Smith of the Penn State Nittany Lions. Andrew Kalista here alongside Mike Gross, the Gross Rational Product. Frank Bernani not with us today, but we got two very special guests. Want to first introduce Penn State beat writer Mark Wogenrich. Wogie, thanks for being here from Penn State on SI, and the legendary online personality for Penn State fans, producer Jesse of the Josh Pate College Football Show. Jesse, thank you so much for being here as well.
Of course. I'm so excited to be on here and talk Penn State because there's enough to talk about.
Absolutely. Mark, I kind of blew past the introduction, so thank you so much for being here. I got to be a gracious host. I'm trying to cheer everybody up here at Penn State Nation wearing a Snoopy shirt. You can't be depressed if Snoopy, I think that's what Penn State should enter next home game against Indiana. Maybe a little Snoopy.
Yeah, over my shoulder.
There you go. Oh, my God. I didn't realize it. So,
yeah, Rudyard Kipling didn't get it done.
Hey, I got the home right behind me, the gift from Tom Bradley, the framed Joe Paterno picture that Tom Bradley gave me a couple years ago. Jesse, let's start with you. James Franklin is no longer the head coach. What was your thoughts on that, I'll say it, softball interview that kind of James Franklin went on College GameDay? You knew he wasn't going to get asked a lot of tough questions. Reese Davis kind of gave him two to start and to finish, but for the most part, it kind of looked like James Franklin was there to rebuild his image, and that's what he's good at.
And that's exactly what it was. Let's not make any qualms about it. James Franklin and Nick Saban share an agent. So that connection there was pretty evident pretty quickly, in which, hey, come on the show. We're going to just toss you some softballs, and we're going to make sure that you're going to be able to just say your piece. We're not going to bring up the Northwestern game. We're not going to bring up the UCLA game, which are huge parts of why he was fired. We just conveniently skipped past that part. But, yeah, now that James is gone, he's going to figure out where he wants to keep on coaching, and that's good for him. And now we need to figure out what we want to do in the coaching search. So I thought that interview was just simply, hey, come on, we'll give you a platform, rehabilitate your image. I saw a lot of people across social media really just say, wow, he looks so good. And it's just like, well, there wasn't going to be, it was just straight softballs. There was no fastballs, no curveballs, no knuckleballs. And that's never what that was going to be. Some Penn State fans kind of thought it was a hit piece. So I kind of want to send that back to you. And like, people say, I saw that on social. Am I wrong, Mike?
Yes. No, you're not wrong. You saw it. I don't thought you saw it. There was one thing that was sort of, I thought by implication was a little bit of a shot, which was when Franklin and Saban had that exchange about the pressure of being number one. And Saban said, hey, I dealt with that 3 or 4 times. Yeah, you dealt with it 3 or 4 times and never, your program never ran into the ditch like James just did. So I thought that was a little bit of, I couldn't believe that everybody wasn't thinking hello about that. But yeah, it was, you didn't expect much. You didn't get much.
Wogie, what were your thoughts on the interview as, you're out in Iowa City, watching this?
It was as expected. I think, as Jesse says, there wasn't going to be anything real substantial coming out of it. What I got a little bit of the petty James that I've always been fond of in covering him over the last decade or so, when he would not say Pat Kraft's name. Mentioned the fact that, his youngest daughter was planning on going to Penn State, and she's not going to do that now. There were those just little moments. He's been so good at stuff like that I don't even, maybe they just come kind of naturally to him. To Jesse's point about being a hit piece, I think the only thing that you could construe in any way negative about that was just posting the numbers. Initially, I think they did have a graphic with, the record against top 25 teams, the 4-21, that sort of thing, but it never really came up. I thought Kirk Herbstreit and Reese tried, but that was an orchestrated move to position James as, having gone through the 5 stages of grief already. Now he's at acceptance and ready to coach again.
The thing about, and again, we're not taking shots at family. This is strictly on James. But James used to always say, you commit to the program. You're not committing to a coach. Kind of like with his daughter not going to Penn State. It's just kind of some irony that I saw in that. So you mentioned he's ready to coach. So Jesse, coming back to you, Mike already knows my feeling on this because he has the pleasure of riding up with me on a lot of Wednesdays availability. So put that in quotation marks. So we talked about this on the way home the other night. I think Pat Kraft did James Franklin a service by terminating him when he did. It almost has Penn State and Pat Kraft be the bad guy because if the wheels came off, it makes James look bad. Now the wheels come off, it looks a little bit, that's James, quarterback being injured, and also it allows him to get a better high-paying job, which then Pat Kraft sells as I protected the bottom line for the athletic department because it's less of a buyout. Am I reading too much into this? Because I think it's a very logical thought process for Pat Kraft to go through with the termination in the middle of the season.
I think it's sound all around. I think he did James Franklin a service in that he is now going to be available for all these other big coaching jobs that are coming open, especially some of the ones in the SEC and potentially the ACC. They're going to come down the line. So, but I don't think this was a move to help James Franklin. This was a move because this was a lifeless program coming out of that Northwestern game. So when you're looking at the season at that point, hey, we're still Penn State. The way I've sort of been talking about this is you're in a plane that's going down and you ejected the pilot out. And now you're trying to put Terry Smith in because he's going to do something that the previous pilot wasn't doing to prevent the plane from going into a full nosedive. And you saw the effort that was given in the Iowa game. We were up by 10 points in the third quarter. And you're like, oh, this is what we needed. We got K-Tron going. You saw changes done on the field that a lot of fans have been asking for. So I think Pat Kraft did what he felt he needed to do. He felt like he gave James enough of a runway. And just to see how much the Oregon game is going to be a game that we'll talk about 10 years from now, because that was the end of the James Franklin era. You can say that it lasted 2 more weeks, but it's sort of like a train derailment. And there was no getting the train back on the tracks after that. This whole season was built up to be, this has to be the season. This is the all-in season. Michigan did the all-in season, and they won a national championship. Yeah. Ohio State did the all-in season. They won a national championship. We're not just a younger brother in this. We can do this too. And so we pushed all of our chips in, and it quickly fell apart. And it's crazy to go back and just think about this entire season. Like, we're really so far into the forest, we can't see the trees right now. You change maybe 5 or 6 plays of this entire season, and Penn State could be 6-0. Like that. It's that small of the part of you're missing with James Franklin is that on those big plays, it never came to be. So I think Kraft did him a favor. I think Kraft did what he felt he needed to do to get the program back going because it was just lifeless. Like you saw it, like the Northwestern game. Drew goes down, everything's there. Everyone's just standing there. It's just numb. And numbness is not a good feeling. Either I need to feel angry, I need to feel passionate, or I need to feel something I need to rally around. And James wasn't giving that. James looked shell-shocked. He couldn't believe it was happening. So I think just by making that change, did what we needed to this season, but you're seeing some of the ramifications of it now because you are seeing the recruiting class is just falling apart. So many guys have now decommitted, and then you're looking now for future layers. So whoever the next hire is, needs to make sure that they're going to attack the portal, but that they might also be bringing a chunk of their team in to sort of fuse into Penn State, a la what Kurt Signetti did from James Madison coming over to Indiana.
Mark, did you, as Jesse said, the train derailed? We kind of get a firsthand sense of this in the media room, talking to the players and being down on the field at the end of the games. Have you, in your days covering Penn State, and we know what happened back in 2011, 2011, I thought it was a little bit, and again, I was looking a little bit more from the outside, but it looked like it was more of an anger type of issue. And during the down times of during the sanction era, and I know we don't talk about sanctions, Bill O'Brien, it was more of an anger. It was literally depression. Have you ever seen it go from so good to so bad, so fast, down on the field, post-game, and in the media room?
Oh, gosh, no. I mean, I was around for 2000 to 2004, and that stretch was just this elongated stretch of just misery. but it did not have the immediate bite because none of those teams, you're coming out of 1999 when the run really started. That was a long runway into, 4 of 5 losing seasons. It did not have just the crash that this did. And that's where I think Pat Kraft is working, because he looked at the situation, and I believe that Pat Kraft is the kind of leader who subscribes to the leadership strategy of when you make a decision, you make a decision. He wasn't going to wait. He had made the decision. It just sounded like he was really leaning in that direction heavily after UCLA. Gave it another week. That Northwestern game, if you watch James on the field, you were down there. It looked miserable. He looked distant, vacant, not even there. After the game, how many times have we heard him say, I'm fiercely loyal to Penn State? He said it, I don't know how many times through the 2021 season when he's being asked nonstop about other jobs and the eventual new contract. He said that numerous times. And that, that last press conference post game, when he was asked, do you want to be here? There was nothing fiercely loyal about it. He was just vacant. And that's where, to me, I think Pat took the entirety of everything that went on behind the scenes that he and James knew about, and then what we saw forward facing, and just got up Sunday morning, had made the decision, and now it was time to implement it. Because think about this. Had he let it go on, there would be a month between home games, essentially, between Northwestern and Indiana. Imagine what happens on November 8th if James Franklin leads that team out on the field, and we're still in this period now of having lost this stretch of games. I mean, there might be 50,000 people in the stadium, or there might be 112 there just with pitchforks. So it was at that point, he pretty much, like I said, I think he felt if he knew what he had to do, he was going to do it. He is that kind of leader to me.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine the scenario going forward, as you're suggesting, Wogie. That's right. It's really think about what this would have been like for the next month. It's crazy. And you're talking about how different the downtime there in 2004 roughly. I'm not sure I've ever seen anything like this in any sport. What the last few weeks in Penn State, a team that was good, there was high expectations on merit as far as we could tell. I mean, maybe not number one team in the country, but certainly a contender for the national championship, apparently on paper. And to have it go as south as it did, as fast as it did, I'm not sure I've ever seen it in any sport. And I've been doing this stuff for a long, long time.
Jesse, we talk about that plane going into a ditch. I compare it after the Northwestern game. It's Tom Cruise in a flat spin out to sea. Of course, I'm big on the pop culture reference.
Another popular culture reference from Kalista.
So Mike Gross has a couple questions to toss you, but this is one we've thrown out to a couple guests on the show. OJ McDuffie, we threw it out to. The perception of Penn State and the job at Penn State. Obviously, it's taken a big hit with the last couple weeks. What have you seen the perception nationally like as you're working with Josh Pate? Because I feel like nationally, this program was seen as just like a 1B level program. And now with these losses, and now it's question, well, Penn State's not a blue blood. Penn State's not going to win a national championship. They did James Franklin dirty. What's the perception right now nationally and on your show, the Josh Pate College Football Show, of Penn State and Penn State football?
I think the perception right now is we're part of the Big Ten, and I think nationally it's really hard to separate SEC versus everyone else, because I'm pretty sure I saw Stuart Mandel put a tweet out today about the highest viewed games so far this season, and almost 90% of them, roughly, maybe 80-90%, were SEC games. There's just something different about the SEC fan base. We put out content for all the programs that we think is going to consume that content. Like, we would love to do more Ole Miss content, but that's not really a ravenous fan base. We would love to do more Iowa content. That's not a ravenous fan base. The ravenous fan bases are Bama, Georgia, but Ohio State is, Oregon is, Michigan is, and Penn State is, but they haven't won that big game yet. So it's like you're on the outside looking in, and all that's really happened with the college football playoff is we were always just waiting on the stoop to be let into the party. And then they went from 4 to 12. And instead of just waiting on the stoop, they made the house bigger. And now we were finally in the house as a part of the party. So when you look at the perception of the job right now, I think it's sort of twofold. It's that it's a good job. It's not an elite job. It's probably a B plus A minus job. You're going to get a lot of resources. And I think that's also part of it is people haven't realized the changes in the dynamics that happen away from the football field. What's going on with Pat Kraft, how much he's willing to put money and resources into the football program. That wasn't like it was 5 years ago. And that was part of the reasons that we weren't viewed in the same vein as a Texas or an Ohio State. So I think you're probably a notch down from elite, but knowing that if you get the right guy in the door, that they have the ability to push you back up, sort of like a Mike Elko at A&M right now. Like he really feels like he fits in there, and now he's getting everything that he needed. He went into the transfer portal, got what he needed, and they look like they're ascending to a bigger national stage. And I think Penn State is a job that's like that, but it's not the top. And that's where you want to get to. And I think that's sort of what James Franklin was. James Franklin was a really good coach. He wasn't an elite coach. We're a really good program. We're not an elite program. But that's yet. Just because it hasn't happened yet doesn't mean it can't happen. I think nationally, they sort of get put on that little tier 2 level where it's like, okay, hey, this was supposed to be your year to be that tier 1 team. You're up there in the CFP odds, and it just didn't work out. And that's probably because that's just the perception. And then it's coming off the sanctions, like you mentioned. Like there's a lot of Penn State's image going through different phases right now. And I think right now we're in the most tumultuous phase because you don't have a face of the program. As much as I love Terry Smith, and I'm sure you guys do too, in terms of being a leader, that's not a national face. That's not a national voice. And I think that's why this coaching search is one of the biggest ones. And like Florida's going to go through it, but then there's other jobs that are going to open up. So it's not like we're going to be the only job that's going out and trying to get some of these big fish. You could argue that Florida might be a bigger fish than Penn State. You could argue that if things go south for LSU, they have the ability to go out and get a head coach that we don't have the ability to get. So there's a lot of situations in which you want to perceive yourself as the prom king. And right now it's you're on the podium, but you're just not getting the crown.
Mike, I know you had a question for Jesse. I'm dying to know what this question is because you said coming home. You didn't let me in on it. You're like, I got to ask him a question, so I need to know what this is.
Oh, now I'm putting poor Jesse on the spot here a little bit. But as I told you before, I'm a fan of what you guys are doing. I think it's really cool. I think it's really cool that you can do it, that it's possible to do what you guys are doing. And I'm a subscriber and all that. But I do have one complaint that I want you to carry home to your boss. There's 2 major college football polls, national polls, that have existed for 100 years. One of them is the AP writers poll. The other is the coaches poll, right? Mm-hmm. They both suck. They suck for the same reasons, and they suck in the same way, and they're virtually identical to each other, even in the results week to week. Early this season, your boy is having a separate episode every week to dump all over the AP poll, and there's no mention that the coaches poll even exists. What's up with that?
Well, I would say the coaches poll, most of the common fans it doesn't get the clicks, unfortunately. That's really the answer, is that we do AP poll content, and it's some of our best content on the show. And that's because people go into their search engines and they search AP poll, and that doesn't direct back to the coaches poll. So yeah, the coaches but the coaches aren't watching, like they're watching their team. So it's like, are you really expecting coaches from other teams to be able to be like, oh yeah, I watched that Mississippi State game from Saturday, or I watched 12 to 15 games. Like I know what's going on. So I will bring that to him and tell him.
Writers are covering games too. I mean,
we're just
that's why we like to throw it on it, because they should be doing a better job. And that's why he's come up with the commissioner's poll. And so we do our own weekly rankings of how we think it should be. And we're in a much different spot on Notre Dame than the AP poll is, and some other teams. And it's just one of those things to where the AP poll is such a tent pole piece of content in the college football world that we talk about it, and it becomes our most viewed trafficked videos that we do during the entire season. So okay. I hope that answers your question.
All right. Fair enough.
I'm
Hey,
trying
I
to
love Josh, though.
I'm trying to think of a coach that voted in the poll that wasn't afraid to, rip up the rule book and say, I'm going to vote for somebody else who was number one.
Would
Oh,
you
that's right.
stop finding any excuse you can think of to bring him up?
It's that guy who's on a Wheaties box who voted for Auburn number one and threw convention out the door. I didn't say any name. I just pointed to a photo and a Wheaties box.
Yeah,
That's
the audience is baffled as to who you're talking about.
Jesse, final question from me. I don't know if Mark has one for you or Mike, another one, but there's so much online with Penn State, their fans, and everything else about who's going to be the coach, who should be the coach. I'm done with Pat Kraft if he hires his boy Rule. If it's Dan Mullen, no more donations. We have to get Saban. If we don't get DeBoer, this is a failure. Why is it so diabolically diverse with this coaching search? And is the fan base literally boxing themselves in? And then the final part of this loaded question, which I know I'm giving you, is who is your top 2 picks for head coach at Penn State?
All right, let me answer your first question. So I think coaching searches are one of the most fascinating parts of sports, because the people making that decision aren't necessarily the people who know X's and O's best. They are the people who've gained enough influence to be at the table to make that decision. And so coaching searches, I sort of make it akin to talking about your NFL draft class. Do you really know if the person that you're hiring is going to do the right job? We all thought Luke Fickell would do a great job at Wisconsin. Guess what? That has not happened. Did we think that Dan Lanning was going to do the job that he did at Oregon? Probably not. Not a lot of people on the national side knew who Dan Lanning was before he got to Oregon. It takes fit, and it takes how that coach views that job. So when you have a bunch of names getting tossed around, you often get sort of very surface level on it. Like, oh, is that a sexy enough head coach that's going to get our NIL donations in? Or is that a good enough football coach? Or he reminds me a little too much of James Franklin in this. And so you get so many different people coming at it from different angles that coaching searches are just almost complete wild cards. You don't know what's going to work. You hope that it's going to work. You hope that the coach can come in and really step up. But are you hiring a coordinator? Are you hiring another head coach? Are you hiring someone from the geographical location that's not, are they from the South and they're trying to come up to the North, or vice versa? So I just think coaching searches, all in all, I don't want Penn State fans to set themselves up for failure, because like I said, we may not be the top job when all's said and done. And some of the names that I hear getting thrown around probably aren't going to look at Penn State. And that's not because of us not having what you need to win. It's simply, does this make sense for me right now? Because you're coming into a pressure cooker position. You're coming off of continued success from James Franklin. As much as we want to say, hey, James, it was time for him to go, he still won double-digit games each of the 3 previous seasons. That is a hard situation to step into, knowing that Pat Kraft is putting himself on the line for this. Whoever coach he brings in is basically going to be tied to him, and that's either the ship's going to go down or the plane's going to go up. So it's not the most envious position, but it's the position that I think a really smart and strategic coach could look at, saying like, hey, I've seen that fan base at the top. I know that if I can get them to buy in, that I'm going to get buy-in. I know that we can fill Beaver Stadium every single Saturday. And I know that the Whiteout's one of the best recruiting tools and one of the best atmospheres to try to go and win a big game. So I think when you look at it in totality, I have 2 guys that I think would fit this job really well. And the first one is not sexy at all, but I think Matt Campbell from Iowa State would do a fantastic job here. And I know that's not the name that a lot of Penn State fans want, because it's not a guy who's done it on the SEC stage or another Big Ten or Notre Dame or any other stage like that. But what Matt Campbell has done at Iowa State was taken a program that was consistently under 500 for almost 2 decades before he got there and turn them into a team that can go out and win with little resources. They fight hard recruiting battles, and you'll hear different coaches come and say, why are you considering Iowa State? Like, we are a 5-star program. They are not. And it's just like, that coaching staff is able to go out and build those relationships. And I think if you get a guy like Matt Campbell, who really knows the X's and O's, like, he is only going to leave Iowa State for certain jobs. And I'm hoping that Penn State is one of them. And so I know that's not the sexy pick, but that's just me looking at what I think he can do. He can bring his entire staff in, and there's not going to be too much churn. And I think he's someone who can come in and get the X's and O's correct, which is ultimately what I want to see. I could care less about some of the other stuff. Hey, go out and win football games, then the NIL is going to follow. And I think the other name that I personally would be looking for is Eli Drinkwitz. And coming over from Missouri, I'm a little bit worried. I think he's tied pretty closely to the Florida job, as is Lane Kiffin. And I'm hoping that maybe if they decide to go with Lane Kiffin, that Drinkwitz looks at this and says, hey, I've been able to build Missouri into a really good program. I've been able to go out and attack the transfer portal very intelligently. I have a good crop of young recruits that I could come and bring with me. And he's done wonderful jobs hiring coordinators. And I think that's maybe part of the storyline that Franklin's messed up on is right now we're ready to jump on Andy Koldenicki because of the gimmick offense. It's just not working. And
we're going to a little bit in this show.
Yeah. And then Jim Knowles is like, all right, well, hey, do we hire a defensive coordinator who is going to take a year to implement a system in a year that we had to win? Like it never really made sense. But I think Eli Drinkwitz would be an awesome second option. And then I would put Rule as a distant third. I'm a little worried about that, but at the same time, he's been able to take Temple and Baylor and make them perennial powerhouses. And I think he would do that with Nebraska, and not to have too much recency bias with what happened against the Minnesota game last year. But those would sort of be the three guys I would be looking to target.
All great thoughts. All great thoughts for me. Mike, anything for producer Jesse?
Other than what I said earlier, no. Pass that along here.
I do have a quick question from the national perspective. We kind of get tied. James Franklin used to have a saying about we're living in the submarine, and that means when you're covering the team, you're just kind of bunkered in from a B perspective. But what's the level of like national schadenfreude about this, the way Penn State's season has gone? I know it would affect other programs. Like if there's a complete meltdown at Notre Dame, you would hear kind of like, hooray, or Alabama, wherever, Georgia, that sort of thing. But has Penn State risen to that level where they're kind of outside of my friend from high school who went to Pitt and texts me all the time about his wonderful glee of what's happening right now? Is there a national level to that? Is there any sort of like national, schadenfreude about what happened?
I haven't really sensed that. I think from a national perspective, it goes back to Penn State being at that B to A- level. Is where are the big wins that pisses off a fan base? The last time we beat Ohio State was 2016. I was a student. I was there. That was a long time ago. Michigan, we beat them, and it was a couple years back, but not since they really risen. And then so you look at being unrivaled, and we don't play Pitt every year. So that, like, you just don't have those rivals that really go on and cling. Like, it's easy to hate on Alabama because they had such a sustained run of success. It's easy to go and hate some guys who have a head coach like a Lane Kiffin, for example. You might just dislike Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss because of what he did at Tennessee and then what he did at USC and the way that he handled things. James Franklin was pretty buttoned up and clean, and that's a great part of having a program is that there's not, especially coming off of what he got the program at, there was no scandal. There was nothing to really go and make people say, oh, I really dislike Penn State. And outside of Penn State fans, you don't really have too many people being like, oh, like, I really am excited to see Penn State struggle. So I think from the national perspective, it's just more of a situation of, I think you look at it and you would hope that Penn State would have been there because you're looking at the Ohio State game in 2 weeks and just that shine for the Big Ten's not there anymore. So you're really looking at the rest of the Big Ten schedules like, where's the marquee games? They're all done. You might get Ohio State, Michigan at the end of the season. And so you might have some fans looking at Penn State being like, you were the reason that that's a thing, that the Big Ten is so far down. And while that may be truthful, it doesn't really lead to hatred or vitriol that you would want to get your program. You want to get your program to that point to where, oh, I really revel in seeing you do that. But we haven't done anything to really make the national fans feel extreme anger or extreme happiness.
Great stuff. Great perspective from the national media. He is producer Jesse Myers, a former Central Dauphin Ram, great playing for the Bloomsburg Hall of Famer, Glenn McNamee. I always got to give Glenn a shout out on the program if I'm talking about football. Penn State alumni for the Josh Pate College Football Show. And Jesse, I will say this. After the Oregon defeat, the best monologue in all of sports college football commentary was Josh's monologue, and I guess it was a soliloquy, to you about you being upset. You're a great follow on Twitter. If people aren't following the Josh Pate College Football Show, they should be. If they're following our show, they definitely should be following that as well. You guys put out great talent, and you are an awesome follow on Twitter as well. And folks, if you missed it, he was also on Landon Tangwell's College Football Show. Make sure you go check out that episode as well. Producer Jesse, thank you so much for being here, man.
Thanks, you guys, for having me.
Appreciate it.
We want to thank producer Jesse of the Josh Pate College Football Show for coming on the program. And we also want to thank Wrapping Paper of Conshohocken, the best in your gift-giving experience. Look up Wrapping Paper in Conshohocken for custom designs, Penn State themed as well, for all your alumni graduate gift-giving needs, and also for your wrapping paper needs around the holidays. And folks, we really appreciate all the follows, likes, and comments on YouTube, our social media pages as well. Tell a friend about us. It's an ad-free podcast. It's a free podcast as well. And this week we are joined by Mark Wogenrich, a longtime Penn State beat reporter, currently on Penn State on SI. And guys, the Iowa game, we saw some different things from the Penn State offense. First game without James Franklin on the sidelines. There were new guys running on and off the field. Talking to Terry's kind of an open book. It seems like the changes that we saw in Iowa are just going to be a microcosm of what we see going forward. I feel like he's going to have a lot more changes coming up in the Ohio State game. Mark, what feeling do you get from that based on what he said out in Iowa City?
I don't know that I would say a lot. There were some personnel moves, clearly, especially on offense when they make the move to go to the dual quarterback. I'm not entirely sure we'll be able to see that again. That'll be dependent on Jackson Smolek's health. He was hurt in that game. If he's not available, that they're going to be in rough shape at quarterback against Ohio State, because Beckham Kritza has not been available all season. He's been on every availability report is out. So you're looking at Ethan Grunkemeyer potentially being the only healthy scholarship quarterback for that game. Now, I think Terry Smith did say on Tuesday that he's bringing Beckham Kritza off the IR, as he said it, so he'll be available. But if you're going to dial that back, I think that's going to be, that will dial the offense back tremendously, to the point that, hey, maybe we'll just see Katron Allen take 11 Wildcat snaps against Ohio State. They might just have to run something like that. I don't know. And then, defensively, I don't know where they can go with, personnel. They could try. At this point, he could try anything. You could try to bring the young receivers up. They got a couple of plays in for Kobe Howard and Tysier Denmark. I don't know that anybody else is going to see some action. I don't think you're going to mix any more offensive linemen into the mix. You're using the 3 tight ends. I mean, if you switch it back up and get Nick Singleton more carries, at that point, I don't know that you want to see that. I think maybe there'll be some more subtle changes, but I don't think Terry's going to overhaul this thing, absent some just like complete, roster changes where, players just quiet opt out or something like that.
Mike, before I get to you, I want to play Terry Smith on the wide receivers and pose the question to you this way. This is Coach Smith on Tuesday talking about some new wide receivers.
I'm coming in with a new set of eyes and lenses to see this thing. And, I've seen Kobe and Tysier because I coach the DBs, and, I see them every day and I know what they're capable of. So I'm going to give them a shot.
This is a defensive backs coach, and it's just mind-boggling and perplexing. And we're going to talk about Andy Kotelnicki in a little bit, but the D-backs coach who just got thrown into the fire is the one that's saying, I've seen these guys play. We've seen highlights. They got shake and they've, quote, flashed, but yet as the offense has done nothing, they've done nothing but grab the Gatorade bottle. Like, why is it taking this long?
Well, I don't know. And you wonder if there were arrangements made with the transfer portal wide receivers, guarantees made. I don't know. I don't know how that stuff works, but I do know. Now, Wogie, you weren't there last night. When they opened the gate and let us into practice, the whole offense went indoors to install some new stuff. So, hey, who knows what we're going to see.
Yeah, I was going to ask, did anybody peer through like a door crease and see them like installing the wishbone or something like that?
That's what I'm thinking. Maybe the wishbone.
We saw some things. We saw some things and heard some things Not that we're going to discuss here on the podcast.
Yeah,
You'll probably hear about it up in the press box or on next Saturday. So
yeah, but I mean, it's weird that wide receiver is a I would think would be a position where if you've got it, and go play and go run around and make plays. And I also think at this point they're not playing for a whole lot. So maybe start thinking about the future and getting younger. I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing. Now, of course, Terry Smith doesn't want to hear we're not playing for much because that's not how he's wired. And even if he was, he wouldn't say he was. But yeah, I mean, they had 3.3 yards per pass attempt against Iowa. That's like one of the worst numbers in that statistic that I've ever heard in my life. I don't know. It's one of added to the long list of things that are astounding about the last month. Unbelievable.
that stat line, by the way, is very reminiscent of the 6-4 Iowa Penn State game. And we were talking about it outside of practice, and I was just bebopping stats off Thomas Frankar of On3, and I was like, is this a winning stat or a losing stat? And he was like, losing stat. I'm like, oh no, man, that's the winning team. So just
kind of 49 offensive plays for Iowa. Is that a winning stat or a losing stat?
Yeah, exactly. Right in the same vein. Before we talk Andy Kotelnicki, he was available earlier today on Zoom. The question was posed to him. I think it was Audrey Snyder. What went wrong?
I don't know. You know what I mean? There's that answer could be so long and into stuff, but the reality is it's just, it hasn't gone like we were hoping. And what do? You go to the next play, you go to the next game, you go to the next moment and opportunity. But I don't really have a good explanation for where it is, you know what I'm saying, or where it was, I should say. I'm more focused on what it's got to be by next week.
Not what the Penn State fan base wants to hear. I don't know, and I think they would say
what do you want to hear? What do they want to hear, Andrew? What do they want to hear? I suck.
Probably.
Yeah.
It's a good point.
I'm not going to hear that.
It is a good point because they want blood, and they're not going to be given that. But it is a perplexing on how this offense that returned a presumably top 10 draft pick, brought in the leading catcher out of the ACC, brought in a Big Ten receiver that could catch contested balls down the field, lost Tyler Warren, we know that, but returned an offensive line that was being hubbubbed to 1994, and it's just been disastrous on multiple levels. So that's what Andy Kotelnicki said to the question. I don't know where it went wrong. It's gone wrong in a lot of directions. I asked Terry Smith at practice if there were thoughts and considerations to changing the voices calling the plays, and just to give the players a little bit of maybe a spark. Tyler Howell's called plays in the past. Is it time that maybe that happens? Terry Smith says the play callers are the play callers. Mark, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and Andy was asked about that, and I think he said, I'm not retiring. If I'm going to paraphrase, I'm not retiring from play calling. And to the clip you played, there was about another minute or so more of that just was just him talking. And it was the kind of speech where if you start talking and then you just kind of lose your way and you can't bring yourself back into the point you were trying to make, that's where he was. He just got caught up in talking. He got to the finish of his point, which was, I don't know, of the point he was going to make, which was, I don't know. And I'm not going to tell you what I think I do know. But then he kept going for like another minute. That kind of ostensibly made it worse. I think there is some validity, and there might be some, you look at UCLA and how it worked to get a spark there. But UCLA also had a quarterback who could get them the spark. There was a dynamic that Neuheisel and Amalieva were working kind of in stride to go to another level. What would Ty Howell what does he know? What has he seen that he could spark this particular group of offensive players? A first time, it'll be a second time starting quarterback, and Ethan Grunkemeyer. The spark would be somehow getting Nick Singleton ready, or not ready, but enlivening Nick Singleton to become that big play running back he hasn't been all year. So I don't know what Ty Howell could do to change up the stasis that has been part of this Penn State offense that Andy didn't try last week by using two quarterbacks in some of the formations and stuff like that. So it might just be a new voice. And at that point, are you doing something with Andy's career at that point too? Are you telling him if you're going to remove him from play calling duties, then you're cutting him loose? And that, do these coaches want to do something like that when they all know they're done there anyway?
I got you.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, it's his offense. He's been here for what? He hasn't even been here that long. And it's his offense. He's going to call the plays. That's just how it's going to be, I think.
Moving on, we'll talk. Jim Knowles kind of flows into this because I have a theory about if Penn State hires a offensive coordinator to be their head coach, what the staff may look like. Jim Knowles has a big contract. Penn State was a stop away against Oregon from winning. They needed a stop against Northwestern to win the game. UCLA, they kind of got boat race. Special teams played a part in that. They never had the lead. They needed a stop against Iowa. They didn't get it. What's the future of Jim Knowles? Whether he's on the next staff at Penn State, he's going to continue to call plays, obviously, as Terry said. But people are looking at this as a very talented defense. We've talked about it, Mike, how many draft picks are possible on this entire team. Defense has a lot of draft picks, especially in the secondary, and a couple up front. What does the future for Jim Knowles look like if he's not on the staff at Penn State with the new head coach coming in?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a really interesting question. And it has to do, I think, a lot to do with whether the new head coach is a defense first guy or an offensive guy. That's a big piece of it. And I just thought it was so interesting. A couple of weeks ago, they made King Mack available. And he said, well, I just asked the defensive coaches if I could start going to their meetings so I could understand things better. And then some of the other D-backs have been doing that too. I think Zakee Wheatley has been doing that. And then Smith was asked about that last night, and he said, some of these times they have multiple reads to make, and it's like there's 6 reads. There's combination reads, and there's 6 of them, and they want to make sure that they're like there might be one that's the 4th best, or they want to get the best one. He made it sound like it's too complicated for him. I thought that's what the implied message that Terry Smith, who is a defensive guy, was giving. So it's yet another example of a thing that it's unbelievable how badly this worked out. Maybe you really do need a year to figure out how to play in Jim Knowles' system. Well, this was supposed to be the year.
It sounds like hiring a name isn't always the best option, is what it sounds like.
Fair.
Yeah, Terry used the words, it's very complicated, right? And he compared it to an NFL defense and said, well, if you're going to go play in the NFL, you've got to learn how to study. He called it math class. He literally used the term, it's math class. And this is in week 8 of a season. Yep. That we looked in February. In February, this was not not a thought, because you thought with the personnel returning and Jim Knowles, the reputation he has and the defense he has had at Ohio State. He held Penn State to 1 offensive touchdown the last 2 games that they played, that this was that perfect marriage, that it was going to be this perfect marriage. But you kind of got little signposts, little hints along the way. I think during the first bye week, James Franklin said, we're not playing fast enough and aggressive enough. We're reading, reacting. And that kind of took me away, took me aback, because I thought they didn't really give up a touchdown in the non-conference season. It was all, both touchdowns they gave up where, last play of the game to Villanova and, the last minute of a game to Nevada, I guess it was. I'm looking back. So you kind of pushed that away. And then they gave up 17 against Oregon in regulation. And there's only been 3 teams. I went and looked that up. There's only 3 teams that have done that to Dan Lanning while he was at Oregon. And one of them was Wisconsin last year, to give up fewer than 20 points in regulation to Oregon. So you thought these guys are in good shape. But the one thing they haven't been doing, they've been getting off the field without giving a lot of points, but they're on the field so much. And that might be part of it. There's just confusion in certain places, like on third downs or something like that. Iowa was the first Big Ten game where they went ahead of 3 and out of the 4, the 4 Big Ten games that they played.
There's a stat. I didn't know that.
If you look at just like the drives, it's all 6 plays, 7 plays, 8 plays.
Yeah.
Time of possession before the Iowa game, they were like ranked 100th in the country, and part of that is defense. And Andrew, you brought up that they were behind against UCLA. That was one possession game when they needed a defensive stop. Malieva, right? They scored 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter. They were in position. All 4 of those games, could not get a stop in any one of those games. And part of it is because they're on the field a ton, potentially because they're just confused in certain situations.
Yeah, after the block punt, needed a stop.
Yep.
Didn't get it. Perfect example in that. Moving on to the head coaching talk. For me, I'm coming off my spot of Penn State should hire a head coach. I don't know if it was a tweet from Neil Rudell that I saw about the last time Penn State hired an assistant coach who wasn't a head coach before, but I'm kind of moving off the spot. So I could see a scenario where if Bill O'Brien is terminated at Boston College, Will Stein, Brian Hartline, Joe Brady. I think Joe Brady kind of would be the favorite because of the Terry Pagula connections, like if you were a betting person. But I could see maybe Bill O'Brien being molded in as the offensive coordinator, with an offensive coordinator of those 3 young guys being elevated to the head coach. Has run a program, has run multiple programs, knows Penn State. I don't know if Bill O'Brien would come back, but it's almost like kind of like a dream scenario if you're Pat Kraft could possibly kind of do that. What would your thoughts be if you had Will Stein, Brian Hartline, Joe Brady as your head coach, Bill O'Brien as an offensive coordinator, and then possibly you retain Jim Knowles? Mike, I see you laughing, so I obviously.
No, I'm not laughing dismissively. We talked about this. I'm not at all. The thing about O'Brien is I think he's pretty adaptable. I think he's a game plan offense guy, so he's not going to clash with the head coach with his offensive concept, I don't think. And yet I think he's a really good coordinator. So that's not crazy at all. That's kind of the scenario. Maybe if you have a defensive guy as the head coach or an offensive guy as the head coach, which you're suggesting. So yeah, I don't think that's crazy.
Mark,
but I would ask, what are in those situations, what are Brian Hartline, Joe Brady, and Will Stein's associations with Bill O'Brien? Because Hartline worked with Bill for what, 11 minutes?
Yeah.
However long Bill was the Ohio State's offensive coordinator. I don't know. I haven't done any of that research. I don't know what their relationships are like. So, Joe's been in the NFL. Joe's kind of worked his own, I think just worked his own way, like through his coaching career, that I don't know that he would look at Bill O'Brien and say, I'm going to hire him because it's a nostalgia tour for him to come back to Penn State, or even because he's just a great offensive coordinator. Joe might want to be that guy and hire up to be for a defensive coordinator, or hire just some kind of assistant thing, whatever. I don't know. But I'm just thinking of their relationships. I think the bigger thing is, who's Pat going to hire as a general manager if you bring in one of those 3 guys? You really had better have somebody with legitimate contract knowledge, cap knowledge, player roster building knowledge, because especially Joe Brady's not, he would have just a semblance of that in the NFL, but I think they would need serious oversight.
I think they need a GM. I think that would be a good hire anyway, right? And regardless, I think that's as important, I think, as the coaching hire. When I did last week, here's my obligatory coaching search column, and I threw Joe Brady in there just because I've really been impressed with him. I just like the way his offenses go, and I wasn't really serious about it. And then I saw some reporting. Tyler Donahue, for example, reported that Brady is in the hunt, which surprised me. So I don't know. And then today, this week, I did my second one, volume 2 of the coaching search column, and I threw Jeff Brom's name in there. I'm a little surprised that he isn't getting mentioned more. And here's something I sort of think about this big picture approach to this hire. The next couple of years, their roster is probably not going to be great. And you maybe want an X and O guy. You maybe want a guy who can overachieve, at least in the short term. And Brom to me is a pretty impressive guy. I mean, so anyway, I threw him in there in this week's column. I think I'm a little surprised that people aren't talking about him more.
The argument I always used as James Franklin falling short was Jeff Brom at Purdue. If Jeff Brom was able to pull off big wins multiple times at Purdue, one with a putrid roster, and that was my argument that, well, why can't James Franklin do it with a better roster? And the argument that always came back to me, well, people get up for Penn State. That's a failure reason to me.
Well, that's failed reasoning, but James is winning. Brom isn't winning 10, 11 games a year either.
Well, I get that, but it's hard to win 10, 11 games from the state that he inherited, that Purdue program, and got it to where he was. I don't think Jeff Brom would be number one on my list. I don't think Jeff Brom's a realistic possibility because of it's not just his connection to Louisville; it's an entire family circle.
Yeah, that's how much does that mean to it?
Yes,
I think it's a huge piece.
He could be a legend in Louisville, and unless his thought is I could take a Penn State job, they're going to hire possibly my brother to be the head coach. Now you're talking about generational wealth commas into the whole family circle. That's the only reasoning that I could come up with. And I don't think Jeff Brom is that type of guy. But what he did this past week against Miami is just it's not a resume builder because his resume is already established and well known. I just don't think he leaves Louisville.
I don't know if we're going to get caught in a trap of looking at coaching search based on week by week results and that Matt Rule eliminated himself.
Of course we are.
with that just dreadful performance at Minnesota, and Jeff Brom elevates himself with that big win. One of the things I would look at would be Pat Kraft's relationships, who he knows in this business.
Yeah.
I mean, he's already hired a couple of people, I think, from Boston College. Of course, one being Mike Gambino, the baseball coach. We always come back to Matt Rule and the familiarity, but I think there's something to that with Pat. I think there is a familiarity, that he has a comfort with that. There's another coach, and I'm just blanking on who it was. It's field, I think it's lacrosse perhaps, but I'm just not sure. Where they hired an assistant from his time at BC.
Yeah, you're right. I can't think of it either.
And so I just think there's something. Yeah, I think there's something there. That doesn't mean he doesn't have a list, like a wish list of just superstar names, and that he probably hasn't talked to half a dozen of them already. I just still think there's a connection between him and Matt Rule that you just absolutely cannot rule out until ultimately maybe they lose at Beaver Stadium on November 15th.
If they go for Rule takes it, right? Rule takes the job.
Oh, absolutely. I believe it 100%.
No.
I would bet my house on that. I'd bet my future house, all my family houses. I would bet on that. Mark, going back to that, this isn't going to be a Scott Strickland type of progression down at Florida, who has had failed multiple hirings. The fact that he has a job is amazing at UF. I do see the president in my current job standing 10 feet from me. And if this failed and Matt Rule came in and failed, I'd be the first one to say you cannot run a state flagship university based on personal relationships. So for me, this is Pat Kraft's job on the line. Yep. Is he willing to bet his career and this job at Penn State on a connection with Matt Rule?
That's one of the most fascinating elements of this, because I think you're absolutely right. When you come up and say we are going to win national championships in football, and in 4 years, if you're 8-4 and you're looking at firing whatever coach that is, if it is indeed Matt Rule, right? You have tied your job to that guy. And I don't know the answer to that. I tend to believe that he would walk that line to a certain extent. I think he will walk that line pretty far. Matt Rule coming in with a 9-3 record, a 10-2 record, and not being in the playoff, that he can show that, yeah, Matt at 7-5, he's taken a huge leap, because that record's going to matter. It is going to play a role in the sales pitch of it. He's not going to be able to turn around and say, our next guy is going to win a national championship. He's going to have everything he needs to win a national championship, and then point to Matt and say, oh, yeah, and this is a guy who just went 7-5 and is 2-23 against top 25 teams. You can't sell a fan base on that. You can't sell donors on that, or at least your sales pitch is going to have to be really strong next year, if and when they go 10-2 next year.
Yeah, athletic directors and football coaches are tied together. Their career fortunes are tied together always at big schools like this. But man, that's true times 10 in this situation with Pat Kraft. With this,
Mark, who's your favorite? Elko also is a lot. I mean, he's a New Jersey guy. That excites me. Any New Jersey guy kind of would excite me, because that's where Penn State has to recruit. He took a shot at the media, saying 3 weeks ago he was getting fired, and now he's getting mentioned for all these jobs. I think Penn State, if the LSU job doesn't open, I think Penn State's the best job on the market. I think Penn State's a better job than Florida, because the Penn State fan base is a little bit more patient. So I do think that says something. They might not be patient online, but I think that's a small minority. So would that excite Penn State's fan base, even if they end up crashing at the end here? Is that something, because Mike Elko doesn't sound sexy like a Lane Kiffin or an Urban Meyer.
Yeah, there's how many coaches have won national championships or so? There's like 4, right?
Yep.
So
that's right.
You're just not going to get this whatever sexy name. There's, how many of them who exist? Urban Meyer, Lane Kiffin, and then again, those are sexy names who might not be great fits for this job. I hate to piggyback off Jesse, but I think he was dead right with Matt Campbell. I really like the fact that Matt has done. You want to project forward, I think, with these jobs, and what Matt has done at Iowa State with the amount of resources and whatever recruiting budget he has and the recruiting footprint that he goes through, there. If you project that out and using Penn State's, the resources that Pat Kraft's going to give you, the recruiting budget and the recruiting territory that you're going to have, that expanded recruiting territory digging in to the South, everything else that you have in your back pocket, a new stadium in 2 years, all of that, all the fundraising you're going to be able to build off that, and the fact that there's a 35,000 acres worth of tailgating around the place that wants a national championship just desperately. I think I just would project Matt Campbell. Again, name recognition and playoff, like lack of playoff wins, whatever. But I think you can project him out as being a really strong candidate. That, to me, I really like him. Drinkwitz, too, I think is fascinating with the offense and what he's done in the portal. His portal strategy has just been excellent. He knows how to spend money. He puts resources to use really well. So I think, when he said those 2 names, I thought, oh, those are the 2 guys I was going to say, but I'm just going to have to do it anyway.
Yeah, you have to do it.
I think Penn State's an elevator. I think Penn State elevates everybody, whether it's Matt Rule or not. And that's something I think people need to look at on everybody's resume. I get everybody's resume has a hole in it. They just do. Mike, let me ask you this and continue your point, but I want you to add this in there. I've had people say to me, I'm done with the Big 12. Andy Kotelnicki, Jim Knowles, Mike Yursich, they put Matt Campbell in there. I've had somebody come up to me talking at the last game, I'm done with the Big 12.
Well, I think that's more an argument for style of play than it is that, well, if you're a head coach in the Big 12, you can't win in the big leagues. I don't know about that. What I would say about Campbell is we were talking about thinking of coaches as the CEO guy or the X and O guy. Campbell, I think, combines those two a little bit. I think you could see him winning here with maybe not the greatest roster if that's what you have to do for a couple of years. I think he's a good all around choice. And I thought Wogie with Missouri, didn't they right at the beginning of the NIL thing? They passed some state law and pumped a huge amount. They were kind of ahead of everybody else,
Right.
with pumping huge amount of money into that. And that makes me think I need to see more about Drinkwitz. But maybe that's unfair. But I thought that was something where he had a little bit of an edge in that way. Whether it was an unfair edge, I don't know. Or maybe it's worn off by now. I don't know.
Jesse didn't mention Vanderbilt head coach, didn't mention Key at Georgia Tech. I don't think Key leaves Georgia Tech, but nobody's mentioned Dan Mullen. Am I the only guy that thinks Dan Mullen would do really well at Penn State and in the Big Ten?
Urban Meyer mentioned him last week on his podcast, so you're not alone.
Oh, there we go. Okay. Me and Urban Meyer have something in common.
I had Mullen in the first obligatory.
Well, yes, that's true. You did.
Column, yeah.
I'm just saying, like in our small little Camelot and Utopia podcast right here.
It is a utopia. Yeah.
Like I'm high on Dan Mullen. I thought Dan Mullen at Mississippi State was a good dude. I thought he was an X's and O's coach and did more with less. I think Mississippi State is the worst job in Power 4 football. I just do. And, at Florida, like he made the comment, I won 9 games 3 years in a row and I got fired. So he understands it, and he could obviously coach ball with what he's doing, this year. And I think Penn State would elevate him and he would have resources.
And he got right back. He did TV for a while, got right back in, and he's winning again. He's winning again not at the high level, but UNLV, they're winning their game.
That's UNLV is a hard place to win.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
I mean,
I like Mullen. I think he's very good. Yeah.
There's some scrappiness there. I don't know that your point about elevating, I think, as you say, the job would elevate everybody, but they have to meet, the coaches have to meet that elevated level. And Dan's won at some places where it doesn't matter as much. And it doesn't, and he has, just hasn't won like at a big place and beaten Ohio State. I think the second thing you want to do in this job is beat Ohio State. That might be the first thing that you want to do, really.
Yeah.
It's gotten to that point that you've got to prove somehow that you could beat that team in particular. So if anybody's pitch when they're doing their PowerPoint, they can bring it up. If Dan Mullen says, here's 6 ways you can beat Ohio State, and that's a good pitch. Yeah, you listen to that too.
You know what? But I think the broad point here, I think, is they're probably going to get somebody who's pretty damn good. I mean, these guys are all pretty good. I mean, there's no Nick Saban. There isn't one. He's not available. But the guy they're going to get, I mean, we haven't mentioned Manny Diaz. I like Manny Diaz a lot. I think they're going to get somebody good.
And if you figure they're going to pay $12 million, so they're going to get somebody good. I think that Signetti contract reset the market. They're not going to have any choice.
Yeah, that was a game changer. That was a paradigm shift, as we say in the business.
I actually considered this one. If they struck out with all their top targets, is there a bridge candidate to come in, stabilize, recruit at a high level, and turn it. And one guy struck me who's in TV, Chris Peterson, on the old Washington coach.
He's
Younger than
He
Cignetti.
seems out to me.
He does seem out, but I thought like, if there was
I
a
don't
bad
know
year,
that. I
3
don't
years
know what I'm
from-
basing that on. I don't know. I thought he was one of the great college coaches. I think he's underrated historically. But whether he's a factor in this,
Yeah, he popped into my mind, and if this guy said no and this guy said no, and it's like, where do I turn? Do you want to coach college football for 4 years max, turn it around, stabilize here, instantly win? I thought that could possibly be a match. Mark, any closing thoughts?
I'm still struck by the fact that we're talking about you have to stabilize a program. You're stabilizing a program that has lost 4 games by a total of 13 points this year. When Frank and I were leaving, and this has just been a pleasure for me to substitute for Frank on this. I don't deserve this, but we were leaving Iowa. We were leaving Kinnick Stadium Saturday night, and he turned to me and said, has Penn State ever lost back-to-back games by 1 point? And I looked at him, I was like, I don't know. Has anybody ever lost consecutive games, like a Power 5 opponent, by 1 point? We went back and looked, and no, it was the first time that has happened in school history. They're that close. So I don't think that this is, to the point, I don't think this is a rebuild. I don't think that there's anything to stabilize. And as Terry Smith said, I don't think, I just don't see the reset necessarily. A year, yeah. But I don't see Pat Kraft giving somebody 4 years to reset this program. That James Franklin did that in 2014. You've already done that lifting. You're at a much higher level. I think there's an expectation to win within probably 3 years, 3 to 4 years max. You're gonna get are you going to get, is there going to be a $96 million contract on the board here? 8 years, 12 million. I just see that's where they're going to have to go to pay. And they're not paying somebody like that to stabilize anything. They want to win. And
I would be more worried about the number of years than the money, right? Because I think we all would agree that, fair or not, James's contract was a little too long, maybe, and you got the year 12, and but yeah, you're right. I mean, they're not thinking about anything other than winning a natty sooner than later.
Well, just to defend my point on Peterson and the stabilize a little bit. One, I'm in the full Tom Cruise is in a flat spin out to sea, and this plane's going down as he kind of alluded to as well. But it would be, obviously, Chris Peterson wouldn't be getting $12 million. It would be like, hey, there's no name on the market that we want right now. And this is I don't want to insult Chris Peterson because he's one of the greats, but a bargain. It's a bargain. You come back in here, you do the job. You're going to be paid handsomely. You're not going to be paid $7.5 million. It's probably more like a $6.5 million contract to get him for just a little bit of time. And also Penn State spending a lot of monies in other areas, kind of reset the checking account for just a little bit.
It wouldn't be the craziest thing I've seen in the last month or so.
I just try to be a rational product like yourself. So,
exactly.
Closing
not Pat Kraft's money, that's for sure.
Yeah. It's always easier when it's not your money. Mike, closing thought.
Closing thoughts from me.
Yeah, from you.
They're going to get a good guy. And I think it's funny how where James is going to go next and where Penn State's going to go next, both of those questions are a hell of a lot more interesting than the football games the rest of the year. But we're all going to go to Columbus and see what happens.
We're an hour and 8 minutes plus into this podcast, and I just realized I left out one of the topics I wanted to discuss with producer Jesse and Mark. So, Mark, this will be the final thought. I'm just going to add this one in. Who wins a national championship first? James Franklin or Penn State?
That's not loaded.
That's a heavy one.
That's a heavy one. I'm going to go with Penn State because I don't know where James ends up initially. I don't know that I know that he's going to end up next year at a program that is doorstep national championship. Like, that is at Florida. If he goes to a place like UCLA, he's not winning before Penn State. Now, at Penn State, we also might be talking a decade here too. That if it stretches out that long, and James spends 3 or 4 years at UCLA, and something opens up, I could see him going. I could see him doing that. But I'm going to go Penn State probably. Maybe I would say Penn State before James. Yeah.
Mike, we'll get your take on that next week before the Ohio State game, since I butchered the show. I buried the lead. I buried the lead.
Relax. Everything's fine.
Closing comment from me, James Franklin on College GameDay said we won a bunch of big games and we're going to go win a national championship somewhere else. And I immediately flashed to the great Rodney Dangerfield movie and the professor talking about where to build a plant and a business, and Rodney Dangerfield going, where? In Fantasyland? But that was just my thought process on we've won a bunch.
Well, James Franklin often mentioned in the same breath with Rodney Dangerfield.
Back to School is a classic, my man.
No respect at all.
Classic.
For Mike Gross with the Gross Rational Product and Mark Wogenrich of Penn State on SI, filling in admirably, above and beyond, hitting well above the average that we always bring every single week. Mark, we want to thank you for filling in for Frank Bohaney this week. We'll do it again with Frank. That'll be a lot of fun. And also from the great online personality and great producer of the Josh Pate College Football Show, producer Jesse, for stopping by as well. I'm Andrew Kalista. Make sure you follow the Blue White Tailgate Podcast all over social media, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter as well. Reach on out to us at all of our Twitter handles. Let us know what you want us to talk about, and we appreciate all the likes, follows, and comments as well. We also want to thank Wrapping Paper, the best in your gift-giving experience in Conshohocken, Pennsylvania, for supporting the show. Have a good one, everyone. We talk to Buckeyes next week.